Our first speaker, however, is John Gizzi from Human Events. And John, where is John? Come on up here, John. John Gizzi from Human Events has spoken to us for a number of years. And John's a good friend. John were you actually at the first PLC in 1989?
I sure was.
He was at the first PLC in 1989 and at most of these conferences ever since. John has covered Washington for Human Events as its political editor now for 31 years, I guess we are. He is now their White House correspondent, and he has an opportunity to go to all those White House briefings and attempt to keep the liberal media and President Obama in line. That's a big job, John. He writes every week in Human Events. I hope that you'll have an opportunity to either subscribe to that or go to humanevents.com. But without further ado, John Gizzi.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What a wonderful crowd at 7 a.m. You sure make a fellow feel like giving a speech. And my only regret about this conference, in which I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, it deals with two people who were unable to be here, my mother and father in Connecticut, who just 3 weeks ago celebrated their 66th wedding anniversary. And I just wonder how they would have felt to hear Lowman's introduction. I think my mother would have been impressed and my father would have been amazed. You know, it's something, when Lowman asked me to speak, he told me that I would be the breakfast speaker. And then I realized that I could not really make any prepared remarks until I knew whether or not the government would shut down. And then to add more of a hurdle to climb, I would technically be the next speaker following Dr. Charles Krauthammer. It was a little intimidating, but Lowman reassured me, "You'll do fine, take it easy." And he said, "It'll be like a walk in the park." And I said, "Yes, it is, Central Park at midnight." You know, as an old newsman, I realize we live in a world that's changing all the time as far as developments. And I just look at my own life in the last week. On Tuesday, I was at the briefing room at the White House. Barack Obama made one of his cameo appearances on the budget, flanked by Press Secretary Jay Carney, and I was surrounded by my colleagues in the White House press corps. And look at me today. I'm flanked by Lowman Henry and Sam Rohrer, and I'm surrounded by my friends at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. And when I say my friends, I mean my friends. I've been coming here since the very first PLC, when our first speaker was Newt Gingrich, and he introduced me to his parents who were there. I made many good and lasting friendships. Fred Anton, who makes it all possible, and Phil English, who later went on to serve with distinction in the Ways and Means Committee, Jim Broussard, and so many others who are here today, others who could not. So you'll pardon me if I teared up a little bit when someone greeted me last night and said, "Welcome home." Well, we averted the shutdown. And I know there's mixed opinions on that. But what I say is, and I was talking about this at the breakfast table earlier, we have only postponed and delayed the very same arguments until next Thursday. And we're going to have the arguments again and again until it's all finally resolved. And you will hear the mantra coming from the White House that I've been hearing. In just his last 3 appearances before the White House press corps and on television, President Obama said that the budget process was being held up because people were playing politics with the process or making political statements with the budget. All right, let's think about that for a moment. The House of Representatives, according to the Constitution, has power of the purse. That means it plays the premier role in the crafting of the budget. So any statement about policy that's put in the budget has to be political. Let's put it another way. When Franklin Roosevelt found himself with an attack on U.S. soil and addressed Congress on December 8, 1941, the United States embarked on its greatest spending in military might ever. In fact, GDP was devoted almost exclusively at one point, 90%, to military spending. That was a political statement in the budget process, and FDR must have been political when he said 2 days after Pearl Harbor, with confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. And we did, because the budget was changed at the time. When John Kennedy said in 1961 we would put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, that meant a significant change in the budget, because there'd be more spending on the fledgling space program than ever before. And so it was when Lyndon Johnson declared war on poverty and increased domestic discretionary spending to a record high, even higher than the New Deal. And then when we were attacked on 9/11, and George W. Bush found himself with a budget with less spent on defense in the gross domestic product than there was since before Pearl Harbor, he had to make changes in our spending priorities as he declared war on terror, and we entered a new kind of warfare. All of those could be categorized as political statements within the budget because they changed the direction of how our tax dollars were spent. So I don't mind, I am not bothered by that statement at all regarding the budget. Now I'd like you to think about the words of a Democrat, a liberal Democrat, but one who thought for himself, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. In fact, he was such an independent thinker that even though he was an architect of the poverty program of the 1960s, he also wrote a book entitled Maximum Feasible Misunderstanding, a book that warned of the danger of community organizers. And Senator Moynihan had a saying, "You're entitled to the facts. You're entitled to your opinion, rather, but you're not entitled to the facts." And here's the facts. Whatever your views on the issues that were the subject of controversy and brought us to the periphery of a shutdown, the facts are that we are in a noble cause in the budget process to try to turn the tide that is now pointing toward a $1.6 trillion deficit and at least have something to turn over to our children and our children's children within the future. And just look at the things that were being defunded. Forget for one moment what Planned Parenthood does or any differing views about abortion in the budget process. It means very simply that cutting out tax funding for Planned Parenthood means saving $363 million for the taxpayer per year. If you look at the president saying we can't pay politics with the Environmental Protection Agency, well, what that means is that we can't enact the Inhofe-Upton bill, which would take away and severely roll back the EPA's oversight over greenhouse gas emission. Now, according to a study by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, if enacted, the Upton-Inhofe bill would save $27 million for the taxpayer in 1 year and $250 million over the next 4 years, 2012 to 2016. And then, of course, there's the issue of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I hear some strong sentiments out there. If what Republicans were proposing were enacted, that would save the taxpayer $500,000 per year on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or less than 10% of its own operating budget. And again, if you think this is politics in the budget process, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a bipartisan solution because it was recommended by the Bowles-Simpson Commission on Deficit Reduction appointed by one Barack Obama. Now, there's one area in the budget process regarding funding that you may not have heard a lot about, but you should. I certainly have, because I've heard the President bring it up now 3 times in the last 4 weeks when he's made his cameo appearances with the reporters. And that is Project Head Start, the federally funded education program for preschoolers. The President has declared this off the table. He said it's an example, if people try to cut it, of making a political statement in the budget process. Well, let's look for a moment at Head Start. It is a legacy of LBJ's Great Society, founded in 1965, and over the remaining 46 years, it's received $163 billion from the taxpayers. Barack Obama's administration in its first year proposed increasing the funding, and now he said it's off the table in the budget talks. Well, a report from the Department of Health and Human Services, an impact study, gave Project Head Start less than top grades. In fact, it said in some cases it was actually harmful to the preschoolers in certain subjects by the time they reached the first grade. And then the General Accountability Office reported on its management and administration, citing cases of fraud and misrepresentation at Head Start offices in 6 states and the District of Columbia. And mind you, these are reports prepared, again, by the Department of Health and Human Services and the General Accountability Office, completed in 2010 under the administration of, you guessed it, Barack Obama. And this is what he wants to save. You know, Madame Curie, the great scientist, once said that there is nothing in life to be feared. It is only to be understood. This is the assignment that we have as conservatives, to communicate our message to the public and to win others over to our side. That in cutting these programs, they're not a political statement. They're a statement about the future, about vision, and about what we leave the next generation. It's that simple. Ross Perot put the term deficit on the map. More and more people understand what Congress is trying to do right now. A shutdown of government, something that scandalized people 15 years ago, that wounded mortally the newly elected Republican Congress under Speaker Gingrich and gave political resurrection to Bill Clinton. Well, that situation has changed. A poll yesterday showed that the voters say if a shutdown happens, 46% would blame the Republicans in Congress, 48% would blame the Democratic president. They're not playing the blame game. They're sharing the blame, which means they're open to hearing just why it's happening. And I dare say, Bill Clinton said he drew the line on certain programs and he faced down the Republican Congress in 1995. I have to believe today that if Bill Clinton were president, he would probably go along easily with what Republicans want to do, read the pulse of the people, give his own explanation, and wind up taking credit for it. So let's move ahead. The cause is clear. The case for communication is solid. The opportunities will be numerous, and indeed, they're going to be endless. And it's up to us guys, really. In the age of the internet, your lawmakers in Harrisburg and in Washington listen to you. I dare say in Pennsylvania it's going to be more significant because you will face this same kind of crisis come June unless your own budget situation is resolved here. So contact your members, go forward, be bold with your agenda, and keep in mind something. The Chinese, long before they began exporting world domination and before they began buying our debts, they gave the world wisdom. And today, it might be wise for all of us to follow the admonition of the wisest of all Chinese. When words lose their meaning, Confucius said, men will lose their freedom. Thank you, and God bless you all.
What we're going to do, since we have some time, John Gizzi, by the way, is the Google of political information. If you really want to know anything about political, anything that's happened in any congressional district around the country, any U.S. Senate seat, John knows the history of it going back to the beginning of the Republic. So this is a guy, I got to tell you a story. When John Murtha died, I had John on my radio show to talk about what would happen in the special election. And we started talking about the 12th Congressional District, which I actually lived in and had served as a county chairman in and thought I knew rather well. No. John went back to the beginning of the Congressional District from the time Western Pennsylvania was settled by the settlers and took us all the way through with every candidate, who won, who lost, why, what their wife's name, mother's name, and children's name were, and everything else. So he is by far the most knowledgeable political expert that we have on our side in Washington. So we're going to take about 10 minutes, and rather than have you cards, if you want to just stand up and very shortly and concisely pose a question, we'll have John answer a few questions for a while. So, yes, David.
Tea Party candidates have said they don't support this CR. What impact do you think this is going to have on 2012 in terms of the Republican Party?
David Madeira, himself a former congressional candidate, has just asked what the impact will be of many refusing to support the CR on 2012. Well, I can tell you that talking to some of the members and noticing how many of those who went along with the CR with different caveats, like this has got to stop or we've got to get a permanent budget laid out, suddenly began to vote no against CRs that came up 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, and the attitude was changing. Joe Walsh, freshman congressman from Chicago and a former teacher and social worker, political newcomer, he told Le Figaro, the French publication, that he would vote consistently against the CRs because they contained spending that he opposed in the campaign, and in his words, I'm coming up here from Illinois with rifles trained on my back. In other words, here was someone whose nomination and election he credits to 1,300 very active Tea Party activists from the disparate Tea Party groups. He listens to them and gets the message. So I think in many cases, it's actually going to enhance the candidacies of those who stay firm on this issue. And again, those who haven't may have further opportunities to vote against it. And likewise, those who oppose it now may proudly vote for future CRs when Barack Obama agrees on the 3 points that I raised before: the Environmental Protection Agency, the funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and Planned Parenthood, and just maybe relents on Head Start. And incidentally, Congressman Todd Rokita of Indiana, another freshman, said if we only stay firm and articulate these things, we will break him. And Todd is a very smart person. He was once my intern. Yes. Yes, sir.
Do you think that there's any possibility that health care will pass in the Senate?
Repeat the question, John.
The repeal will pass in the Senate. No. Thank you for the question, because it just tells me that the health care issue is not resolved law, as many in the White House would like to think. Very frankly, the numbers aren't there. The Senate is 53 Democrats and 47 Republicans, and it is just not going to happen at this point. Now, one could even argue that if the Senate were in Republican hands and they passed the repeal, the president would veto it. Look, the health care bill will only be struck down if the U.S. Supreme Court eventually gets to it and then realizes, as Judge Vinson wrote in his early decision, that requiring people to purchase health care is outside the Constitution and not what the Founding Fathers wanted. Now, as you know, more than 20 state attorneys general have filed suit against it. I spent an interesting evening last week with Mark Shurtleff, the Attorney General of Utah and one of the original plaintiffs. He told me a good story that you might find of interest, and that is that after Judge Vinson's decision, many governors became nervous because they were being required to implement parts of the health care bill, even though it doesn't take effect until 2014. And so they asked the administration and the Justice Department if they could make a move, Rule 12 is what it's known, and go directly to the Supreme Court. And the administration flatly refused. They don't want to take their chances on an early ruling by the Supreme Court. And incidentally, General Shurtleff told me that he believes in the end Justice Kennedy will get it right and the court will rule 5-4 against the health care package. Yes, sir.
Hi. The societal debate is between more government and now less government.
Exactly.
Growth of government. I think that that was being fought most fiercely within the Republican Party. You know, the establishment calls claims to purge and purification and all that, which I think, frankly, it is. Where do you see that playing out? Do you see less and less big government Republicans involved in the party and having any say, or what's the outcome of all this?
Well, when I was a kid, I hated people who said when I was a kid. Now I'm a little bit older and I find myself saying it all the time. When I was a very young reporter, the terms liberal and Republican were not mutually exclusive. And certainly from my trips to Pennsylvania, I realized that. That's when Arlen Specter was still a Republican. And there were other Arlen Specters around the country, in my home state of Connecticut, in New York, and in California, where the term rhino, Republican in name only, originated. And even to this day, Governor Charlie Crist of Florida was a new kind of Republican, and now he has been elected to practice law. I have to say, George Wallace once said there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. That was in 1968. Today, there's at least a good silver dollar's worth of difference. Those who are committed to the idea of big government and an enhanced role of the state in the individual life are usually Democrats. As Dr. Krauthammer said last night, the Democratic Study Group, from which Bill Clinton and Joe Lieberman became national politicians, is essentially shutting down. On the Republican side, everybody is a conservative these days. There's no distinction, say, between a Goldwater and a Rockefeller anymore, but there'll always be less than conservative Republicans elected. Scott Brown is light years ahead of any Republican who's come out of Massachusetts in a long time. On the other hand, he is someone who people in this room would have some sharp differences with on certain issues. And I would say that you are going to see this always. But let me share with you the words of a sharp politician, and Lowman and Fred know her, my wife, who's a former state legislator from Michigan and candidate for governor. And she always used to say about Michigan Republicans, let's get to 51 and then we'll start arguing. Okay. Take two more? Okay. Thank you all. I love you so much, and I hope you'll keep inviting me back. Thank you all.
Thank you, John. Great job. Well, it's always a pleasure to have John Gizzi here, and he's going to be around for a little while longer. John always joins us for the whole conference, so if you have an opportunity to talk to him one-on-one, nobody's better. And, well, I've met your wife. There's one person better. But thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to have you here. We also have with us to speak at breakfast this morning the Honorable Sam Rohr, who has a new title. He is the State Director of Americans for Prosperity. And you may have noticed that Governor Corbett has put out a budget that requires no new taxes, and he is sticking to his pledge of not raising taxes at all. Many of us believe that the reason that occurred is because we actually had a primary election last year. And a lot of times, you know, the state Republican Party wants to clear the field, get down to their anointed candidate, and let's move on to the general election. But what we found is that the people in this room and conservatives across Pennsylvania are saying, no, wait a minute. We want to have a debate and a discussion in the primary. And the fact that Sam Rohr was in that primary and moved the discussion to the right in our direction, we got a no new taxes pledge. And that pledge that happened because of Sam's candidacy is what is driving the entire budget debate in Pennsylvania and has transformed the landscape from how much more can we spend to how much can we cut. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Rohr.
Thank you for that. I know you just wanted to stand up. Thank you, John. Good to follow you. I was thinking when we didn't determine to speak until last night because Tim wasn't confirmed not to come until just recently. So I talked to Lowman last night and I said, well, I was going to introduce Tim this morning, and I said I could introduce him and then speak. So I'll introduce Tim and then I'm going to speak. But I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm glad to stand in front of all of you again. We've heard some very, very good things here this last day and last night, and we're going to conclude today with a balance of many more good things. This is a time of empowering us all to go back home a little bit more energized, a little bit more educated, and a little bit more knowledgeable on how to communicate the conservative message. And certainly the message that we have, when given even close to equal opportunity, does prevail. And that's a good thing. Well, I'm going to share just a few words here this morning. I have, as Lowman said, taken the position of State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Americans for Prosperity has not had a real presence in Pennsylvania. Matter of fact, when I was in the House for these 18 years, I never really knew of them because there was no presence here. But they've had significant presence across this country. And when presented the opportunity, I considered well, and with the team already on the ground, Jennifer Stefano and Katie Abrams down here in front of me, who is our Communications Director and Policy Director with me. I said, you know what, this is something in an organization committed to the defense of freedom and liberty of the individual and freedom, free enterprise freedom, where we can have a free economy where people can run the risk of starting a business, make a living, earn a profit, be proud about it, employ others, all leading to prosperity, which is what we want and what we've been blessed with in this country for so very long. And that's the goal. And that's why I said that's something that I agree with. So now we are in a position now of designing and putting forward here our initiative for Pennsylvania. We'll be crafting legislation, actually supporting things already there. We'll be coming out with that in about a week and a half, so stay tuned for that. For those of you who are not planned, I'll just announce it up front. At the end of the conference today, we will be giving free our Right Online training session to teach you how to blog more effectively, to use the social media more effectively. The left has used this. The right is now using it better, and this is part of the effort to help train and to teach. So even if you think you know and are being involved, take advantage of this afternoon. it'll be time very, very well spent. So you still have time to sign up. I think there's over 100 and some right now. That being said, I thought, what are we going to say here after the budget? John has covered what has happened in the budget. The compromise was reached. But I'm not going to go down that road right now. I thought rather than to talk about the specifics that confront us in Washington and Harrisburg relative to our economic condition, and we can't get away from that. Because a lot of what the focus of AFP is about and what you're all about is obviously bringing government back into the confines of the Constitution, spending no more than it has, spending appropriately, meaning constitutionally guided, federal government not doing what the states are authorized to do, and basically letting us as individuals do what we can do best, and that's run our lives ourselves. But we've got a big problem, folks. And we have a big, big problem, not just in our states, but in Washington. And we've heard some things relative to how you fix that. And I think a lot about how do we fix this? How do we address the magnitude of the issues that are before us? It's not just the balancing of a budget. Because as John said, a budget is the premier document of policy. It's a policy document. So you have to get into the whys and the wherefores. And that becomes the real issue. That becomes where conservative ideology comes forth. And I heard someone saying the other day that they thought that this was bad, that this budget was all about ideology. It is all about ideology. That's the whole point. It's just whose ideology will prevail. And that's what we're talking about. I think, and I was trying to think through, if we were to follow some simple steps, how we could ensure that we can turn around this floundering ship of state. I think the first thing starts with this. We've got to tell the truth. We have to begin by telling the truth. The truth about where we are, and frankly, the truth is pretty ugly. You referenced the facts. We're entitled to our opinion, but we better get the facts right, or your opinion don't mean a whole lot. The fact of the matter is, we haven't been getting the truth out of Washington on numbers for how long? We've not been told the truth on unemployment. It's not 8.8%, it's in the upper teens. We've not been told the truth about the inflation rate. It's not 1 or 2%. It's blowing up into almost 10%. We've not been told the truth about the debt. It's not just $1.6 billion deficit. It's not even $14.1 billion debt. It's really about $80 trillion, I mean, when you put in all of our obligations for our entitlement programs for which we have an obligation. Let's tell the truth. The truth can be pretty ugly, but unless we know the truth, we never can fix the problem. So we've got to start telling the truth. We've got to describe the problems honestly. Now, what problem are we trying to fix? What problem are we trying to fix? Is it just to get a budget that appears to be balanced? Appears to be balanced? You can't be balancing a budget when the president and others are wanting to take out our interest payments and to leave it out of the budget. It would be very convenient to take out 40% and just say, oh, we've balanced the budget. But what about this over here? You've got to describe the problem honestly. And that means put it all on the table. The fact of the matter is, our present condition is unsustainable. We heard that last night. Now, what's that mean? Unsustainable means you can't continue it. It means you have to change course. It means you have to get onto a different path. Because unless you change roads, the unsustainable part means you'll fall off the cliff. So we have to understand that unsustainable means unsustainable. It has a very, very unfortunate end. Fortunate part is we have time yet here to steer the ship. But we've got to grab a hold of it right away. The second thing is we have to design honest solutions. In other words, fix the problems. We have papered over the cracks for so long. Rather than fixing the problems, be it in this state or in Washington, that the problems have just become larger and larger. We have to have structural changes, meaning simple things. Obamacare came in and made some structural changes. The only solution is to structurally unchange it, for the states to nullify it and for Washington to repeal it. It's not a matter of slightly defunding one piece or another. You have to take out the whole cancer. You don't go to the doctor who tells you that you are fatally ill and you've got something in there that needs to come out, and he says, I'll just take out 25% of it. You're still going to die. You have to take out the whole thing, fix the problem. For spending, what's the legitimate goal for spending? You spend only what you have, and you stop borrowing. You stop borrowing from the Chinese, you stop borrowing from the banks, you start borrowing, and you stop borrowing from the Federal Reserve, printing money that they don't have. We have to bring ourselves back to what the economy can generate, and it is plenty enough to make us very prosperous and pay for every obligation that we have. It's as simple as that. We have to pursue constitutional government. A lot of people are wondering, where do you cut? Because everybody's got an opinion. We'll go back to what the Constitution says is the obligation of the federal government. That's it. Really, truly, we have to talk in terms of what is supposed to be. Is the federal government supposed to be involved in education? No. They have no constitutional authority. Nor do they in welfare. And I find it extraordinarily interesting that as we in the states are trying to balance budgets, the greatest reasons for states being out of balance and mostly insolvent today is because of the areas of education and welfare. It's because of federal government involvement getting into the states, handing out money to the states that were not theirs in an area that they had no involvement to be. The states took the money and they created a behemoth that now is unsustainable. So let's go back to the beginning. This is part of defining the problems and fixing them honestly. Then thirdly, we stand on principle. You know, excuse me, in real life, if we are not guided by principle, I think we fall for anything. To me, standing on principle means this. We reject pragmatism. Oh, I know that word's used a lot. It's a very pragmatic thing to do. But in the politics area, pragmatism competes with principle. Pragmatism employs the concept that the ends oftentimes justify the means. And they really don't. They don't at all. It means that we must justify that concept that the process doesn't really make any difference as long as you get to where you go. No, it does make a difference how you get to where you go. It means a big difference. Principle means acting on convictions. What do you believe? What's the Constitution say? What did my oath that I took say? And then act upon that, rather than putting your finger to the wind and saying, what's convenient? What's the easy thing to do? It's courage, rather than compromise. Oh, I mean, I don't mean compromise that you can't negotiate. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about compromising on principle and conviction. We are where we are because too many, I believe, in the past have said, well, just a little bit of erosion's not bad. We can give up just a little bit here if we want to, and lo and behold, we've given up so much of our freedom. We're sitting here now saying, how did it all happen to disappear? Because those who were in their watch said, it's okay. You can never compromise, in my opinion, when it comes to freedom. You can never give up your freedom in order to gain something you hope you don't have. And then I remember our founders. They stood on principles. Let's take some heart from them. I look back and I read a lot about our founders and what they thought and what they did. Brilliant individuals who, because of them, have given us what we're able to stand upon today. We've heard some comments last night and so about during Ronald Reagan's memorial, and I think Charles even mentioned it, that phrase that says that we should be a shining city on a hill. Now, do you know where that came from? It came from John Winthrop, Puritan, 1636, Pilgrims in 1620. He came thereafter, and it was a prayer that he made. And this is the whole context of that phrase, in case you haven't heard it. He said this, a prayer: "Make us a praise and glory, so much so that men will say of succeeding efforts to plant colonies, that the Lord make it like that of New England. In short," he said, "we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all of the people are upon us." Now that's the full context of the phrase. Do you know the brilliance of that was? They knew that the experiment that they were embarking upon was something that they were doing not for themselves, but for generations down the road. And they put into effect a plan that would be able to establish a foundation upon which their children yet unknown could one day rise up and stand upon. They employed a concept that said, we're not thinking about ourselves. We're going to think about what we're going to leave for others. And they knew that if so being and so done, it would be, in fact, a shining city on the hill that all the nations of the world would look and say, we want to be like them. And then I think of William Penn. We are in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, the heart and the seat of the beginning of liberty, formally. If you go to the Capitol and you look at the rotunda, there are words that wrap the rotunda. They are the words of William Penn in 1682. He said this, that there may be room for such a holy experiment. For the nations want a precedent. They want an example. And my God will make it the seed of a nation, that an example may be set up to the nations, that we may do that thing which is truly wise and just. Do you know the brilliance of that statement? The brilliance there was that William Penn said it was possible for a new nation to be self-disciplined, to govern themselves according to a set of law, the Ten Commandments, and elect leaders to office who could conduct themselves accordingly, and form the concept of limited representative government, where we didn't need a king to tell us how to live, and we didn't need a church government to tell us how to live. We could embark upon a holy experiment, and that's what he was talking about. And his goal was, a hope and a prayer was, that it would become the seed of a nation. And in 1776, when the Signers' Declaration signed that document in Philadelphia, it became the seed of a new nation. And it developed to that it became an example to all of the nations, further building upon John Winthrop's City on the Hill, and gave the world the greatest picture, the greatest example of what freedom really looks all about. We are the recipients. And the last thing is this. Let's not be afraid to talk about it. Let's trust in God. If we do not believe, If we believe that we have the answers to all of our problems in and of ourselves, we are wrong. Because the problems would have been solved a long time ago. Our founders didn't believe it, and neither should we. When you're lost in the woods, the best thing to do is pull out your compass. We have the Constitution as our compass. We have the legacy that's left to us by our founders. It's our compass. They have plowed the ground for us. We don't have to plow the ground again. We just have to pick up the reins and begin to follow the path they were in. When you're pinned down in the foxhole and the bombs are dropping all around, where do you look for help? You look up. As they say, there's no atheist in a foxhole. Because there are times when you realize you need help that's much bigger than what the person around you can give you or anyone else. We need divine assistance. When we're on the edge of the promised land, what did some of them do? Some said there are giants in the land. We can't go in. But there were two who said, let's go in and possess the land.